They dragged my 8-month pregnant fiancée away from the altar on our wedding day. Her white dress trailing in the dirt, guests gasping in horror. 2 men with HOA emblazoned on their uniforms, not real cops, just power-drunk wannabes, physically ripping her from my side as she cried out in pain. All because we dared to support a political candidate who threatened their control. I still see their smug faces when I close my eyes. You think your home is your castle? I thought so too, until I learned how far they'd go to silence us and what it would take to bring them down. I'm Daniel Blake, a contractor who built my dream home in Riverwood Estates 3 years ago. Never gave much thought to the HOA beyond paying the dues. Emily and I were planning our life together. First the house, then the wedding, then our baby girl already kicking in Emily's belly. Commissioner elections were coming up, and Emily's uncle, Samuel Hayes, was running on a platform of reforming HOA powers. After seeing friends fine thousands for ridiculous violations, we began hosting campaign meetings. Nothing fancy, just neighbors discussing how to protect their property rights. Our backyard gazebo, handcrafted from cedar, my wedding gift to Emily, became headquarters for Hayes supporters. We'd received permit approval from the county, but the HOA approval form was processing for 3 months. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a notice claiming our gazebo violated 3 HOA regulations. I called Victor Thorne, the HOA president, explaining our situation. Just a formality, he assured me. Submit the proper paperwork after your honeymoon. Enjoy your wedding. I should have seen the warning signs. Victor had been president for 15 years, ruling Riverwood Estates like his personal fiefdom. Any homeowner who challenged him mysteriously faced a barrage of violation notices. Most fell in line quickly. Those who didn't often ended up moving. The morning of our wedding dawned perfect. Emily stood radiant in her custom gown, handmade by her mother. Her pregnant belly made her even more beautiful. Our families, our neighbors, all gathered in witness. The minister waited beneath the gazebo I'd built with my own hands. The wedding march began. My breath caught as Emily appeared on her father's arm. Then came the sound of a gate slamming open. 2 men in black uniforms stormed down the center aisle, HOA enforcement emblazoned across their backs. Behind them, Victor Thorne, HOA president, surveyed the scene with cold satisfaction. This gathering violates multiple HOA regulations, the taller officer announced, voice carrying over the suddenly silent crowd. I stepped forward. We have county permits. This is our wedding day. Victor Thorne's thin smile never reached his eyes. Your unauthorized structure and this gathering exceed permitted occupancy. This event is terminated. Emily, still on her father's arm, spoke firmly despite her visible trembling. We'll discuss this tomorrow. Please show some decency. Decency? Victor sneered. You're the ones undermining community standards with your political meetings. Today, you learn who's really in charge. He nodded to his officers. What happened next is burned into my memory. The officers flanked Emily, grabbing her arms. Her father tried to intervene. They shoved him aside. He fell hard against a chair. Don't touch her, I shouted, lunging forward as the officers lifted my pregnant fiancée off her feet. Emily cried out in pain. Our guests erupted in outrage. My best man, a former Marine, started recording everything. Emily's mother screamed for them to stop. The officers dragged Emily toward the gate, her white dress dragging across the lawn, her veil torn from her hair. I caught up, gripping the arm of the nearest officer. Take your hands off me, he growled. Or you're under arrest for assault. You're not real police, my father-in-law shouted, blood trickling from his forehead. We have HOA authority, Victor countered, including the right to remove trespassers. Trespassers? I was incredulous. This is our property. Property subject to HOA covenants, Victor said. And we've determined this event violates those covenants. Emily's face contorted in pain as they continued dragging her. The baby, she gasped. Please stop. Something's wrong. Only then did the officers hesitate, exchanging uncertain glances. "You're making a scene," Victor hissed at Emily. "Control yourself." My best friend, Luke, stepped forward. "I've recorded everything, every second, including your officers assaulting a pregnant woman." Victor's confidence flickered. "Delete that immediately." "Recording HOA enforcement is prohibited." "By what?" Luke challenged. "Your made-up rules?" "This isn't enforcement. It's assault." Several guests had pulled out their phones now. Victor surveyed the crowd, calculating. "This gathering remains in violation," he finally said. "You have 30 minutes to disperse or face additional penalties." The officers released Emily, who collapsed into her father's arms, sobbing. Our perfect day destroyed. Our guests stood frozen in shock. The minister closed his Bible, face pale with disbelief. Victor Thorne straightened his tie, expressionless as he surveyed the chaos he'd created. "Consider this a reminder of how things work in Riverwood Estates," he said, his voice carrying in the silence. "Some of you seem to have forgotten. I'd never dialed 911 before." My voice shook with rage as I reported, "2 men are assaulting my pregnant fiancée during our wedding. She's in pain. We need police and an ambulance." Those minutes waiting were the longest of my life. The officers had finally released Emily when she began crying out about the baby, but they stood guard, preventing the ceremony from continuing. When real police arrived, the contrast was striking: professional, calm, assessing. "These men physically removed my pregnant fiancée during our wedding," I explained. "She's having contractions now." The responding officers separated everyone and began taking statements. The crowd of wedding guests, still in their formal attire, eagerly offered testimonies and smartphone videos. "You have no legal right to physically remove anyone," one police officer explained to Victor and his men. "That's assault." "We have HOA enforcement authority," Victor insisted, producing a binder of HOA regulations. The officer barely glanced at it. "HOAs don't have police powers. You can issue fines, place liens, file civil actions. You cannot put hands on residents. Period." Victor's confident facade began cracking. "They were violating multiple. Doesn't matter." The officer cut him off. "Even if they were breaking every rule in your book, you can't physically remove them from their own property." The paramedics were examining Emily, who was now experiencing rhythmic contractions. "We need to transport her," they announced. "Her blood pressure is dangerously high." As they loaded Emily into the ambulance, I caught Victor's eye. No remorse, no concern, just cold calculation, and perhaps a flicker of worry as he realized this might not play out as he'd planned. "Sir," one of the police officers addressed me. "Would you like to press charges?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. The officer nodded. "We'll need formal statements from everyone. This looks like assault, possibly battery, and given the victim's condition, potentially more serious charges." For the first time, the HOA officers looked genuinely concerned. One began distancing himself from Victor. "I was just following Mr. Thorne's instructions." The wedding guests were now providing contact information to the police. Our minister, a retired judge, was explaining legal precedents limiting HOA powers to the officers. At the hospital, Emily stabilized. "False contractions," the doctor explained, brought on by stress and trauma. Our baby was safe for now, but Emily lay sedated, her dream day destroyed. The monitor beside her bed beeped steadily, our daughter's heartbeat, a reminder of what might have been lost. "I'm so sorry," Emily whispered when she woke, tears streaming down her face. "I ruined our wedding." I took her hand, my anger hardening into resolve. "You didn't ruin anything. Victor Thorne did this, and he's going to pay for it." I made a vow that night, more binding than any wedding ceremony. Victor Thorne would pay for what he'd done to my family. My best man's video went viral overnight. Local news picked it up. Pregnant bride assaulted by HOA officers. The hospital received flowers from strangers outraged by what they'd seen. 3 days later, Emily was home, our wedding rings still in their box. We'd barely settled when a certified letter arrived, violation fines, threats of liens. The HOA was doubling down. They can't seriously expect us to pay these? Emily said in disbelief, scanning the list. $10,000 in fines for unauthorized structure, exceeding occupancy limits, noise violations, and my personal favorite, creating a public disturbance. I laughed bitterly. They're the ones who created the disturbance. I contacted every lawyer in the county. Most wouldn't touch HOA cases. Then I found Claire Lawson, who specialized in them. This is far beyond typical HOA overreach, she said, reviewing the video. This is assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The fact that your fiancée was visibly pregnant makes their actions unconscionable. But as Claire investigated, she discovered something that changed everything. This was never about your gazebo, she said, laying out documents from multiple neighborhoods. Look at these patterns. She showed me violation notices across 3 communities, all targeting homes displaying Hayes campaign signs or hosting meetings. Victor Thorne didn't just happen to interrupt your wedding, Claire explained. He specifically planned it as a message to other Hayes supporters. She placed a folder on the table containing emails and meeting minutes. Have you been following the upcoming county commissioner election? I nodded. Emily and I have been supporting Samuel Hayes. He's running on a platform of limiting HOA powers and preventing them from imposing excessive fines. Exactly, Claire said. And guess who's been funding his opponent's campaign? Victor Thorne and several other HOA presidents in the county. The documents showed that Victor had been coordinating with other HOA leaders to maintain their grip on power. Commissioner elections might seem small, but they determined local zoning laws, property tax assessments, and, crucially, the limits of HOA authority. Your home has been hosting Hayes campaign meetings, hasn't it? I was stunned. Yes, twice now. Sarah's uncle worked with Hayes years ago. We've been helping organize neighborhood support. Claire pointed to a highlighted email Victor wrote. We need to make an example of the troublemakers on Willow Creek Lane. Their political activities are threatening everything we've built. Once we shut down their wedding, they'll get the message about who really runs this community. They attacked our wedding to intimidate us politically, I asked, my voice rising with anger. And others, she confirmed. They've been systematically targeting Hayes supporters throughout the county. Selective enforcement, surprise inspections, excessive fines, all designed to silence opposition before the election. Through discovery, we obtained Victor's emails to other HOA presidents across the county. Hayes is gaining traction with his reform platform. If he wins, we lose our authority. We need to identify his supporters and make examples of them. And specifically about us. The Blake wedding presents a perfect opportunity. They've been hosting Hayes meetings for weeks. Shutting down their ceremony will send a message no one will forget. We learned Victor's candidate had promised HOA presidents unprecedented authority under a new Community Standards Act, including expanded powers to levy fines, place liens, and even foreclose on properties with unpaid assessments. They're using HOAs as private enforcement arms, Claire explained. It's voter intimidation, pure and simple. Other victims began coming forward. A family fined $15,000 for an unapproved fence after hosting a Hayes fundraiser. An elderly couple threatened with eviction for yard sign violations. A decorated veteran whose flag display was deemed excessive after speaking at a Hayes rally. The pattern was unmistakable and meticulously documented. Victor and his allies were systematically using HOA regulations to punish political opposition. When we found the recording of their strategy meeting, everything crystallized. Victor's voice, clear and arrogant, elections are won by suppressing the right votes. We control these neighborhoods. Anyone supporting Hayes needs to face consequences severe enough that others get the message. Start with the loudest voices, make it hurt, and watch the rest fall in line. Emily listened to the recording, her hand protectively covering her belly. I knew HOAs could be petty, but this is like some kind of local dictatorship. Exactly, Claire said. They've created fiefdoms where they control every aspect of homeowners' lives. Hayes threatens that power structure. That's why they're fighting so dirty. We discovered Victor had personally called Emily's employer, suggesting she was unstable and pursuing frivolous litigation. Two Hayes supporters had mysteriously lost their jobs after hosting campaign events. This isn't just about an election, I realized. It's about an entire system of control they've built. Claire nodded grimly. HOAs started as a way to maintain neighborhood standards. These people have turned them into private governments with no oversight. And they're willing to do anything to keep that power. As our case built, the retaliation intensified. Daily inspections of our property. Fines for grass half an inch too tall. Citation for a package left on our porch. Our neighbors reported being questioned about their relationships with us. They're trying to isolate you, Claire explained. Make you toxic to be around. It's a classic intimidation tactic. But instead of silencing us, their actions fueled our determination. Each new violation notice became evidence in our growing case. Each act of retaliation documented another abuse of power. We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore, Emily said one night, cradling her belly. We're fighting for everyone they've bullied. For our daughter's future. The battle lines were drawn, David versus Goliath. But this time, David had evidence, witnesses, and the law on his side. We filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Victor personally, the HOA officers, and the HOA itself. Assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, civil rights violations, conspiracy, and voter intimidation. Victor's response was swift. Suddenly, our mailbox height, grass length, even the color of our trash bins violated regulations. Fines accumulated daily. Other Hayes supporters faced similar retaliation. What Victor didn't anticipate was how the community would respond. Neighbors began monitoring HOA activities. Anonymous whistleblowers from within the HOA office leaked documents showing selective enforcement. 3 board members resigned, citing ethical concerns with Victor's leadership. The turning point came when we obtained Victor's private communications with his candidate. The smoking gun. I've neutralized Hayes' base in Oak Ridge. The other presidents are doing the same in their communities. We'll deliver this election, and you'll deliver the legislation we need. That email transformed our civil case into a criminal investigation. The district attorney, initially reluctant to intervene in an HOA dispute, couldn't ignore evidence of conspiracy to commit voter intimidation, a federal offense. Our case broke open when one of the HOA officers agreed to testify against Victor in exchange for reduced liability. He confirmed everything: the coordinated targeting of Hayes supporters, the planned disruption of our wedding, the system of retaliation against political opposition. Victor said making an example of a pregnant bride would send the strongest possible message. He testified in deposition. He said no one would dare support Hayes after seeing what happened to the Blakes. The HOA's insurance company, reviewing the mounting evidence, attempted to settle. Their initial offer, $150,000 with a non-disclosure agreement. Not enough, Claire advised. And no NDA. This story needs to be told. Their second offer, $500,000, no NDA. Still not enough, I insisted. This was never about money. As the election approached, Victor grew desperate. He offered to dismiss all fines, approve our gazebo, even resign from the board if we dropped our lawsuit. Too late, Emily told him through our attorney. You should have thought of that before you put your hands on me. The case finally went to trial 8 months after our ruined wedding day. Emily had given birth to our daughter, Grace, just weeks earlier. The contrast between Victor's cold calculations and our new family made for powerful optics in the courtroom. Emily's testimony proved devastating. Holding our infant daughter, she described her terror as HOA officers dragged her across our lawn. I wasn't just afraid for myself, she testified, voice breaking. I was afraid for my baby, that these men, acting on Victor Thorne's orders, would cause me to lose my child. All because we supported a political candidate who wanted to limit HOA powers. The defense tried painting us as troublemakers who violated community standards. Their argument collapsed when confronted with evidence of selective enforcement and political targeting. Victor took the stand, arrogant to the end. HOAs maintain community standards. Without strong enforcement, property values decline. Everything I did was to protect homeowners' investments. Under cross-examination, his facade crumbled. Confronted with his own emails about making examples of Hayes' supporters, his coordination with other HOA presidents to suppress votes, his instructions to target our wedding specifically, Victor's true motives became clear to everyone in the courtroom. The jury took just 2 hours to reach their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. We find the defendants liable on all counts. The compensatory damages, $1.75 million. The punitive damages, $4.2 million. Victor's face drained of color. He had personally guaranteed the HOA's legal expenses, certain he would prevail. Now he faced financial ruin. Then came the judge's unprecedented ruling. The evidence reveals a disturbing pattern of using HOA authority to suppress constitutionally protected political activities. The court finds this conduct egregious enough to warrant special remedies because Victor had weaponized the HOA itself to violate civil rights. The judge ordered specific HOA assets liquidated to satisfy the judgment, chief among them the community center Victor had named after himself and used as his seat of power. Your Honor, Claire argued, my clients request that the community center property be transferred to them as partial satisfaction of the judgment, to be operated as a public forum dedicated to civic education and community engagement. The judge agreed, adding, furthermore, Mr. Thorne is permanently barred from serving on any HOA board or in any property management capacity within the state. As a final blow, the judge referred the evidence to federal prosecutors for investigation of civil rights violations. The implications extended beyond our case. The commissioner election, once thought decided, was upended as the story broke. Hayes' campaign, initially the underdog, surged in the polls as voters learned how far his opponents would go to silence opposition. Victor approached me outside the courtroom, his usual confidence shattered. You've destroyed everything I've built, he said, his voice hollow. No, Victor, I replied calmly. You destroyed it yourself. All you had to do was leave us alone on our wedding day. He shook his head. You don't understand what's at stake. Without strong HOAs, neighborhoods decline, property values fall, standards erode. This was never about property values, I said. This was about power. Your power, and you couldn't stand the thought of losing it. He started to respond, then stopped as Emily approached, carrying Grace. Victor looked at our daughter, then back at us. For the first time, I saw something resembling remorse cross his face. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, he said quietly. Emily's response was measured but firm. You meant to hurt us, Victor. Not physically, perhaps, but you meant to hurt us enough that we'd stop supporting Hayes. You meant to make us an example. Well, you succeeded, just not in the way you intended. As Victor walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat, I realized we'd won something more valuable than money or property. We'd exposed the corruption at the heart of the system. We'd shown others they could fight back, and we'd created a blueprint for holding HOA tyrants accountable. Victor Thorne resigned from the HOA board the following day. 3 weeks later, he listed his house for sale. His political candidate withdrew from the race, citing personal reasons. The FBI investigation expanded to include HOAs across the county. Several property management companies terminated their contracts. Fearing liability, HOA boards rushed to adopt transparency measures and curtail enforcement powers. Samuel Hayes won the election by a 12-point margin. His first act as commissioner was to introduce the Homeowner Protection Act, establishing strict limits on HOA powers and creating an oversight committee to review complaints of abuse. The community center, now legally ours, presented both an opportunity and a responsibility. What do we do with a 10,000 square foot building? Emily wondered as we toured it for the first time as owners. The answer came when we saw the number of letters and emails we'd received from other homeowners facing HOA abuse. Some had lost homes to foreclosure over minor violations. Others had been forced to remove patriotic displays or religious symbols. Many lived in fear of arbitrary rules enforced by unaccountable boards. This isn't just our story, I realized. This is happening everywhere. 1 year after our ruined wedding day, Emily and I stood again in our backyard. The same gazebo, now an officially approved structure, was decorated with flowers. Our daughter, Grace, taking her first steps, toddled down the aisle ahead of her mother. Commissioner Hayes officiated the ceremony himself, a powerful symbol of how thoroughly we transformed what was meant to break us. We gather here today, Hayes began, not just to celebrate the union of two people who refuse to be silenced, but to mark a victory for every citizen who believes their home should truly be their castle. When Emily reached me at the altar, she smiled through tears of joy rather than pain. The gazebo that had sparked our ordeal now stood as a monument to our resilience. We exchanged vows surrounded by friends, neighbors, and fellow HOA reform advocates from across the state. Many had traveled hundreds of miles to witness this moment, the wedding that sparked a movement. As we shared our first kiss as husband and wife, I caught sight of several former HOA board members in attendance. They had resigned after Victor's downfall, then helped elect a new board committed to serving homeowners rather than controlling them. The reception was held at the former HOA Community Center, now renamed Freedom Hall. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The building once used to enforce Victor's edicts now hosted a celebration of his defeat. Where Victor had once hung his portrait, we displayed framed copies of the Homeowner Protection Act and our court verdict. Victor's office had been converted into a legal aid clinic, staffed by volunteer attorneys helping homeowners navigate HOA disputes. That night, surrounded by those who had stood with us through the darkest days, we realized our ordeal had created something beautiful, a community united against tyranny, determined that what happened to us would never happen to anyone else. The former HOA Community Center, now renamed Freedom Hall, became our wedding reception venue. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Victor's command center transformed into a celebration of his defeat. We converted the building into a true community resource. One wing housed a legal aid clinic for homeowners facing HOA disputes. Another became meeting space for community organizations. The main hall hosted educational workshops on property rights and civic engagement. 3 months after our wedding, Emily gave a keynote address at the center's official opening, 8 months pregnant with our second child. She stood where Victor Thorne once issued his edicts. What happened to us was never just about a gazebo, she told the gathered crowd. It was about whether we would allow fear to govern our communities. Today, we reclaim this space as a testament to what happens when citizens stand together against intimidation. The center became a blueprint. Similar organizations sprang up across the state, then nationwide. Our case study was added to law school curricula. Emily and I found ourselves speaking at conferences, helping others transform their own HOAs from instruments of control into actual community resources. Victor's attempt to make an example of us had succeeded, just not in the way he intended. One afternoon, as I was working on renovations to the center, a former HOA board member approached me. "I need to apologize," he said, visibly uncomfortable. I knew what Victor was doing wasn't right, but I never spoke up. I was afraid of becoming his next target. "Fear is how people like Victor maintain control," I replied. "What matters is that you're speaking up now." He nodded. "There are others, board members from different HOAs. We want to help draft guidelines for ethical HOA governance. We're hoping to use the center for our meetings." I smiled. That's exactly what this place is for. The center hosted its first HOA reform convention that winter. Former board members, homeowners, attorneys, and legislators gathered to exchange ideas for transforming toxic HOA cultures. The movement was growing beyond anything we could have imagined. The Riverwood case triggered a national conversation about HOA power. Investigative journalists uncovered similar abuses nationwide. State legislatures debated reform bills. The Federal Housing Authority issued new guidelines for HOA governance. 5 years later, Hayes was elected to Congress on a platform that included national HOA reform, the Reasonable Governance Act. He sponsored established federal protections for homeowners, including explicit prohibitions against political retaliation and mandatory transparency requirements. Victor Thorne eventually left the state, his reputation in tatters, his assets depleted by judgments and legal fees. The last we heard, he was living in an apartment, no HOA in sight. The HOA officers who assaulted Emily never worked in security again. Our viral video ensured their faces were recognized everywhere they went. As for us, our family thrived. Grace grew into a confident young girl who knew her parents' story by heart. Our son, Owen, conceived after our actual wedding, never knew a world where HOAs could terrorize families. The center expanded its operations to include a hotline for HOA emergencies, a legal defense fund, and training programs for HOA board members committed to ethical governance. On the 5th anniversary of our wedding, we hosted a special event at the center. Hundreds of homeowners shared stories of standing up to HOA abuse, inspired by what we'd done. "Your case gave me courage," one elderly veteran told us. "When my HOA demanded I take down my American flag, I showed them your story. They backed down immediately." A young couple with a newborn baby shared how they had successfully challenged excessive fines imposed after installing a security system without prior approval. "We knew we could fight because you showed it was possible," the new mother explained, her baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. This was our true legacy. Not the lawsuit or the building, but the courage we had given others to stand up for their rights. They came for us on what should have been the happiest day of our lives. They thought their power was absolute. They were wrong. Sometimes history turns on small moments. A wedding interrupted. A pregnant bride assaulted. A community that finally says enough. We didn't just sue them into bankruptcy and take their building. We transformed the system that enabled their abuse. We turned their weapons of intimidation into tools for empowerment. When Grace asks about our wedding photos, why there are 2 sets, 1 year apart, we tell her the truth. Freedom requires vigilance and sometimes sacrifice. And when we look at Victor Thorne's former office, now a bustling legal aid clinic helping families stand up to HOA abuse nationwide, we're reminded of the most important lesson. No one is powerful enough to stand against citizens united in defense of their rights. That's our legacy. And it all began with 2 HOA officers lifting my pregnant fiancée off the altar on what should have been the happiest day of our lives.